But if I were to say, my fellow citizens, that we shall send to the moon 240,000 miles away from the control station in Houston, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall, the length of this football field, made of new metal alloys, some of which have not yet been invented, capable of standing heat and stresses several times more than have ever been experienced, fitted together with a precision better than the finest watch, carrying all the equipment needed for propulsion, guidance, control, communications, food, and survival on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth, re-entering the atmosphere at speeds of over 25,000 miles per hour, causing heat about half that on the temperature of the sun, almost as hot as it is here today, and do all this, and do all this, and do it right, and do it first before this decade is out, then we must be bold.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Jack Schlossberg.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Kennedy Library. I am not a physicist or an astronaut. I do not understand relativity or gravity, so naturally they asked me to open this panel. But if there is one thing that I do know about, it's that speech that we just heard at Rice University. That is, in case you were wondering, the greatest speech of all time. It's uplifting. We choose to go to the moon in this decade, not because it's easy, because it's hard. It's funny. Why does Rice play Texas? It's motivating. Why climb the highest mountain? Because it's there. I memorized that speech in middle school. I used to make myself watch it every single night before bed. But that paid off when I completely ripped it off in my own high school graduation speech. It offers an attitude that I aspire to. At the time, America only had 15 minutes of manned spaceflight. We didn't have the technology or even the materials needed to complete the mission. It was anything but a safe bet. But President Kennedy had no interest in sitting around and waiting, and neither did the Apollo generation. It reminds us that a challenge that may seem scary, daunting, insurmountable, impossible, can just as readily be seen as an opportunity for progress, that it's worth pursuing simply because it's hard. That success is measured not only by accomplishing the stated goal, but by all the unanticipated benefits that come from rising to the occasion. In fact, landing a man on the moon is just the beginning of what the space program delivered. It advanced miniaturized computing, satellite navigation technology, and much of the technology that would later become the internet. But perhaps most profoundly, it inspired a generation, and so many people here today, to dream big and be bold and dedicate their lives to science, engineering, progress, and exploration. So when I hear that speech, I feel a responsibility to welcome the challenges of our time. I think about climate change, not as an existential threat, but as the greatest opportunity imaginable, a chance to add our chapter to the story of progress, as I imagine President Kennedy would. But before we solve climate change here today at the JFK Library, we've got a panel discussion between two extraordinary people. One of them has always been there for me, sends me food when I'm hungry, gets me everything I need, reads to me at night, and seems to know me better than I know myself, and the other is my mother. Jeff Bezos has been dreaming about space since he was 5 years old. For two decades, he and everyone at Blue Origin have been steadily and quietly pursuing that dream. They march to a motto, step by step, ferociously. And for whatever they lack in publicity or flair, they make up for in dedication to their work, steady progress, and stunning accomplishments. In this new age of space exploration, the possibilities are exciting, the stakes are high, the risks are great, and the need for leadership never been needed more. Sorry, I wrote that sentence and it doesn't make any sense. Mr. Bezos' humble and noble pursuit of progress sets a standard for others to follow. We're lucky and grateful that he's here tonight. His co-star, Ambassador Kennedy, is the reason that we're all here. She planned this event. It was her idea. She poured her energy, curiosity, and creativity into it. Her interest in space isn't new. I saw firsthand as she worked to advance cooperation in space between the US and Japan as ambassador. I've caught her reading book after book on the space program, and I've seen pictures of the rocket launches that she took my sisters to, something I may one day forgive her for. Her work in putting this together is just one small part of all that she does for the library. She is the greatest mother in the world. I'm honored to introduce these two extraordinary people for a conversation on the most exciting topic there is. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. Welcome to the Kennedy Library. We've heard a lot today about risk-taking and hard things and challenging yourself. So for me, moderating any kind of a conversation in public is really hard. So I'm doing my hard thing for the day, and I know that you're going to make it easy. So thank you for being here. Thank you for celebrating this anniversary with us, and thank you for energizing a whole new generation in space. I guess I wanted to start, because we are talking about our ancestors, I learned that your grandfather is one of the people who was important in inspiring you in this direction. And I was fascinated to learn that he actually worked for DARPA in
that's right.
the early days. And so I was wondering if you could tell us about his influence and how you got interested in this.
Well, my grandfather, we called him Pop, and he was a hugely influential character in my life. I spent all my summers with him from age 4 to 16. My mom had me when she was 17 years old. She was still in high school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Had to negotiate with the school to stay in school. My grandfather would take me in the summers to kind of give her a break because she was such a young mom. And that turned out to be an amazing experience for me. My grandfather had been a lifelong civil servant. He had started as a messenger in Washington, D.C. and kind of worked his way up, and ended up working for DARPA and later for the Atomic Energy Commission. But I really knew him as a rancher, because by the time I was 4 years old, he had already retired and he was on his ranch, and I knew him as this incredibly self-reliant, resourceful person. He would make his own veterinary needles and suture up the cattle. He would get a little piece of wire and heat it up with a blowtorch and drill a little hole in the end and make his own needles. Some of the cattle even survived. And there's so many stories about him, but he really was somebody who quietly taught lessons just by being around and observing, and it was a great gift to me to be there. I have a vivid memory of his morning ritual. He would shave every morning with an electric razor for like 15 minutes. But that story starts earlier. He had gone to the ranch one day, and he made a mistake. He forgot to put the car in park, and as he was going to open the main gate, the car started to roll down this little tiny incline. And he thought to himself, I have just enough time to throw the gate open, and the car is going to roll right through. It's going to be so efficient. Well, the car impacted the gate, and it caught his thumb between the fence post and the gate, and it stripped off most of the flesh there on his thumb, and it was dangling by a little piece of skin. And he was so angry at himself that he ripped that flesh off and threw it in the brush and drove himself to the emergency room in Dilley, Texas. And they got there, and the emergency room attendants said, we can reattach that. Where is it? And he said, I threw it in the brush. And so they went back with him, and they looked for it for about an hour and could never find it. Probably some bird ate it. But the interesting part of the story is they said you have to get a skin graft. You can sew your thumb to your stomach for 6 weeks, and then we can surgically separate it. It'll be the best, but it's a little inconvenient. Or we can just take a skin graft from your butt and sew that on. He said, I'll take the skin from my butt. So they sewed that on. And so when he would shave in the mornings, which he would do for an excessively long period of time, when he finished shaving his face, he would take 2 quick passes over his thumb because his thumb grew butt hair. And he was completely non-troubled by this at all. This didn't bother him in the slightest. And he really was a remarkable man. And despite that story, one of them, like a very careful, kind of wise man, too. The story is a little out of character, but I have so many memories of him, and he really was a gigantic influence for me.
Well, thank you. I've lost my train of thought. I hope he was a good storyteller, too. Okay, well, now we're going to move on. And I know that I went to the announcement of the Blue Moon lunar lander about a few weeks ago, which was incredibly exciting. And I want you to tell everybody about that. But one of the things that struck me when I went back afterwards and was reading was that you gave a really incredibly clear and coherent description of what you were hoping to accomplish, when, how, why. But I went back, and it seems that you gave almost word for word the same speech at your high school graduation.
Yeah.
So I was really amazed.
Yeah, I haven't evolved.
So hopefully Jack will be not giving his high school speech again. But I mean, the clarity of that and the passion that you have obviously started so early.
Yeah.
And now you've been able to add on all the infrastructure, the complexity, the technology. But can you just talk about how that has stayed with you all these years when you've been obviously busy doing other things?
Yeah, it never went away. I watched the moon landing in 1969 when I was 5 years old, and it had a huge impact on me. I remember I could tell how excited all the grown-ups around me were. And I think, by the way, that's one of the gigantic legacies of Apollo, is it inspired so many people to enter science, engineering, become pioneers, explorers, and I think it'd be hard to overstate the degree to which that program did that for a whole generation of people, not just in the U.S. but around the world. We did something as a civilization that everybody had used as a literal symbol of impossibility. Oh yeah, that'll happen when a man walks on the moon. And they had to change that metaphor in 1969. And so we all got to witness that as a civilization, and it really made people realize the kinds of things that we can do. And so I definitely got that bug when I was 5, and I kept after it. And I read a lot of science fiction as a kid. I studied the science of rocket engines and propulsion and space vehicles and so on and so on. And the more you learn about something, the more you are attracted to it, because once you start to understand some of the nuances and the details and the things that you really learn a lot about become very appealing. And so that happened. It's a virtuous cycle. And by the time I was in high school, I was really on this journey of knowing that I really wanted to be part of someday figuring out how to help build infrastructure and get people into space. And my high school girlfriend, has been interviewed many times, and she says there's no doubt in my mind that Jeff started Amazon just to get enough money to do Blue Origin. I can't prove her wrong. So that's been in my life. I think we need infrastructure to go to space. The real problem with doing interesting things in space is that the price of admission is so high that you can't have that kind of entrepreneurial dynamism that I witnessed up close and that all of us witnessed happen on the internet over the last 2 decades. On the internet in the last 2 decades, you can start a company in your dorm room and it can turn into a giant company. That's not metaphorical, that's Facebook. I started Amazon with a very small amount of capital. I didn't need much capital because all the heavy lifting had already been done. I didn't have to build a transportation system to distribute and deliver packages. It existed. It was called the post office. I didn't have to build a payment system. It existed. It was the credit card, and so on and so on. So when there is deep infrastructure, even if that infrastructure took many decades and many billions of dollars to build out, people can stand on top of that infrastructure and do amazing things. We don't have the infrastructure to do that in space today. If you're in your dorm room, you're not going to start an interesting space company. It's, you know, the starting price tags to do really interesting things in space are hundreds of millions of dollars, going quickly to billions. But if we had reusable space vehicles, then we'd be able to, that would start to change everything. And you'd find a generation later that you could have, you know, the 2 kids in their dorm room create the next great space company, and then you'd see thousands of space companies, and you'd eventually get to, you know, really amazing things going on.
So how long is that going to take? And in the meantime...
Well, I've been at it for 20 years now. So, but it's going to take a long time because building infrastructure takes a long time. So you have to build the road, and once you built the road, people can drive on it. And building the roads is not easy. And I know what the road is. The road is reusability. That's the first primary thing we have to do. We can't build these beautiful, giant, aerospace-grade pieces of hardware machined to great precision and then throw them away after one use. They sit there at the bottom of the ocean, and that's not a way to reduce cost.
So you've been working on this for 15 years, and now you are getting ready to be able to carry humans into low Earth orbit.
Yeah.
And
It's
then
New Shepard, which is our submarine. It's exactly what Alan Shepard did back in the day.
so for those of
That's
you
the-
who want to see, his space capsule is downstairs. So it was great to see that with Jeff.
Ours is bigger. And Alan's is tiny, and it has a really small window. Ours is big and has giant windows. Alan would be, and he'd be like, "Whoa, that is luxe."
But so that, I think, shows people how hard this really is, because
Yeah.
if you've been working on it this hard, and now obviously, but I think it's really interesting, what has the technology that was developed throughout the 60s and 70s made possible that wasn't possible then?
So much. So much has changed. If you were to go back in time to the 60s and bring, you know, the great engineers from that era to today, there are a lot of things that they would be astonished by. First and foremost amongst those is computation. I mean, what we can do with computers and software, they could have only dreamed about. Same thing with sensors. Those things have just made gigantic progress. There are things that have made no progress, like high temperature alloys are basically the same as they were in the 60s. It's very interesting. But the way that we mill those things and weld those things and so on, that's changed very dramatically. We can make things in much less hand effort. You know, so a lot of the manufacturing approaches have changed very dramatically. Some of the best ideas in rocketry were invented back then, and they haven't changed. Regenerative cooling and staging and, you know, common bulkhead tanks and so on and so on. So many brilliant people worked on the space program in the 60s that they came up with an amazing set of genius ideas that we're still using and harvesting today. But the details have changed a lot. One of the biggest things is not, you know, what's in the vehicle at the end, but is the design process now relies so much on computer simulation. You can do a lot of things on the computer today, and certainly all of the aerodynamics can be very finely tuned. You still do some wind tunnel tests to kind of anchor your computer models, but by and large, you can simulate very complicated vehicles in a very high quality way. Even now, one of the hardest computer simulation problems is combustion. Combustion is a very difficult problem to simulate. So inside the main rocket engine, inside the thrust chamber, you're combusting an oxidizer and a fuel. And that's a very violent reaction. It's very hard to simulate on a computer. We're even making progress on that. And so that really cuts down on the amount of iterations, the kind of test, fail, fix loops that you have to do, trial and error. They did so much trial and error back in the day to get all of this to work, and with slide rules. I mean, it's extraordinary what they accomplished, and the more you know about the Apollo program, the more amazed you become. It just keeps going. So we're building New Glenn, which is a Saturn V class. It's about half the size of Saturn V class orbital vehicle, which will fly for the first time in 2021. We're doing it with a couple of thousand people, and that would have taken hundreds of thousands of people back in the 1960s. And that's the dramatic progress with the computer-aided design tools and so on that you see today. It's huge.
So what's the hardest challenge that you're facing technologically with that?
Well, the hardest challenge technologically is the reusability, because that really does add, when you're talking about getting into Earth orbit, that is something that this planet's gravitational field is so strong that with chemical rocket engines, it's something that's just barely practical. If the New Glenn rocket weighs at liftoff with fuel, just under 4 million pounds. And only a couple of % of that ends up as payload in orbit. So most of it is, you've got just a couple % payload. It's kind of a marginal thing to do, even with a staged rocket, much less a single stage rocket. And so with chemical propellants, we can just barely get into Earth orbit. It's almost like God set this problem up as achievable, but just barely. If we had, a gravitational field twice Earth's gravitational field, it really would be intractable. And if it were half Earth's gravitational field, it would be easy. And so it's right there. It's that tantalizing point. And so we figured out way back in the middle 20th century how to do that, but making it reusable in a highly operable way, where you don't have to inspect between every flight and x-ray every component between every flight. Real reusability, like a commercial airliner. Or I'd settle even for a military fighter, which is, has much more maintenance than a commercial airliner, but is still a real reusable vehicle. That's the kind of thing we need to really change the game. And that's technically challenging, because reusability comes with extra mass or decreased performance. If you have inside a turbopump which pressurizes the fuel and oxidizer to get it into the thrust chamber of a rocket engine, you have these high-speed spinning components, turbines and pumps, and those turbines have to be maintained below a certain temperature to have reusability. If you get them too hot, they're going to stop being reusable. And when you decrease the temperature flowing across the turbine, you lower the efficiency. And so because the whole thing is so on the margin of being possible even in an expendable configuration, when you start making it reusable, you've got to add landing legs. That adds weight. You've got to add landing propellant. That adds weight. So all of these things, that's the real challenge. Then if you're talking bigger picture, the second big challenge is after you get to the moon, we have to organize and build the technology to get propellants and resources from the moon. We can't continue to lift everything from the Earth, so that'll be the next phase. But the first thing we know what we need, the first gate we have to go through is low-cost launch.
So that's New Glenn.
Yes.
And that's going to go to low Earth orbit.
That's right.
And
it's also can do translunar to do moon missions and so on. So it's a large general purpose vehicle to do deep space missions as well as commercial missions, satellite payloads and so on.
And so then when you unveil Blue Moon, how does that all fit together? And what are we going to do on the moon when we
Well, so we know things about the moon now that we didn't know back in the Apollo days. Even just 20 years ago, we didn't know. We know for sure now that there is water on the moon in the form of ice in the permanently shadowed craters on the poles. The moon has a very small axial tilt relative to the plane of the sun. So when it doesn't, we don't, like on Earth, because we're tilted so much, you get on the poles 6 months of daylight, and then the other pole is dark for 6 months, and so on. That doesn't happen on the moon. The poles of the moon are continuously in sunlight on the peaks of the craters. And then in the bottoms of the craters, they're permanently shadowed all year long. And as a result, they're very, very cold at the bottom of those craters. And volatiles like water can stay in a frozen form, hundreds of degrees below zero. And we can harvest that ice and use it to make hydrogen and oxygen, which are rocket propellants, high-performance rocket propellants. That's why our Blue Moon is powered by a BE-7 engine, which is hydrogen and oxygen. And the reason we chose those propellants, A, they're the highest performing propellants, but B, we know one day we'll be refueling that vehicle on the surface of the moon from propellants made on the moon from that water ice.
Okay. And so that's the technological challenge.
Yeah.
What's the hardest thing, sort of on the human side?
Organizationally?
Yeah.
So there are many things. I would say one of them is just that the time scales, because we are working on deep infrastructure. And so deep infrastructure takes a long time to build, and the pipeline is really long. And so as a human, it'd be fun to see the results of your work sooner. It's like, it's hard enough, you're going to make a Hollywood movie, you start, and then 3 years later the movie's finished, and then 2 years after that it makes it to theaters. That's 5 years, but the kinds of things we're working on have 15, 20-year kinds of time frames, and that's very, very challenging. You could speed it up, to probably some with more resources and more money and more people, but only to a degree, because things build on top of each other. And so there's only so much you can do. But that's organizationally challenging. You need to select the right people who believe passionately in the idea, who are willing to think long term, who know that God knows how to price his goods. This is hard, and it's supposed to be hard. And I heard somewhere that we do these things because they're hard.
In Rice Place, Texas. But so if you, one of the things we've talked about a lot today is, we set a goal in the 60s, we achieved that goal, and then the question of short-term thinking, changing the mission, how do we get the goal together now to galvanize people?
And that's one way in which government has become much harder than what I face with Blue Origin, because it is very challenging. A lot of the big government programs get very protected by members of Congress. I don't know. I assume if I were a senior official at NASA, I would be very frustrated from time to time, because your senior, Charlie, don't say a word, but he's smiling. Let the record reflect. And because you're taking an engineering mentality to an engineering problem. And that requires consistency of purpose. You can't start and stop. You can't change direction halfway. And so to the degree that big NASA programs become seen as jobs programs, and that they have to be distributed to the right states where the right senators live and so on, that is going to change the objective. And now your objective is not to, whatever it is, to get a man to the moon or a woman to the moon, but instead to get a woman to the moon while preserving X number of jobs in my district. That is a complexifier, and not a healthy one, because, by the way, as jobs programs go, all the people NASA employs and the contractors and so on, they're highly trained, highly sought after, brilliant engineers. They can get jobs anywhere. And so it also happens to be the wrong kind of jobs program for the wrong kind of people. But that is part of the reality. They didn't have that back in 1961 and 1962. They were moving fast. They were, from the time of that Rice speech, I don't know the exact, but I'm thinking probably they were letting contracts, actually finished contracts within a year of that Rice speech. Unbelievable. I know that the Grumman, there were 9 competitors for the lunar lander, and Grumman won. The RFP was released, and then it was awarded to Grumman 6 months later. Today, there would be, 3 protests, and the losers would sue the federal government because they didn't win.
Okay, this is a place that's dedicated to public service, okay? So we're not going to just
so
take
that
this from you.
it's very interesting, but the thing that slows things down is procurement. It's become the bigger bottleneck than the technology, which I know for a fact for all the well-meaning people at NASA is frustrating.
This is a conversation, okay?
Yeah. I'm sorry, did I say something in politics? I'm so sorry.
But I guess you could also say that, we had 4% of the federal budget was going to space, and that there were 400,000 people working on it, and they strategically gave those contracts to spread support. So I guess that's also part of the way you have to do it.
And it was seen as a national security initiative. It was.
But now you've signed up to work with government.
Yeah.
So what can government do that business can't do? I mean, I think business, like you said, can now set a goal and do it efficiently.
So there are a lot of things. First of all, the tools that we use at Blue Origin, we're standing on the shoulders of giants. When I talk about those, simulation tools that we use, the computer design tools, the computational fluid dynamics tools that let us do aero simulations of aerodynamics, those were all created and validated by NASA painstakingly over the last 5 decades. And so without those tools, we couldn't do anything. And so there's already, just that is a gigantic leg up. And so, the things that NASA is going to successfully continue to do are the things that are really hard and that no company can do. The timeline is too long. There's so many of these things, but, hypersonic point-to-point travel might be, doing R&D into that kind of thing. Nuclear power in space. If you want to do deep space missions, you need nuclear power. All the science missions, there's no commercial motive to do science missions. That's for pure science and learning and research and understanding our universe. And all those things, I think, are worthy goals. And they have to be done by either government or nonprofit organizations. But the scale of some of these things, if you look at the big space telescopes that NASA puts out, these are multi-billion-dollar, $4 or $5, $6 billion. These are big programs that really it has to be government. Nobody is going to do those things other than the government. And so I happen to think that's really, really valuable. What you hate to see is the start and stop and, the log jams that get put in place that slow things down on procurement. But the government has a significant role. It's going to be difficult to put humans on the moon without government support. It's expensive. We need government facilities to do it. We need government know-how to do it. It has to be a team effort. It'll be many companies, not just Blue Origin. It'll be collaborative. And in fact, I doubt it will even just be the US government. The Japanese are interested. Your alma mater. The Japanese are interested. And so are the Europeans. And the Europeans have, I think, a really smart idea about building a lunar village on one of the poles of the moon, probably the South Pole. So there's a lot of activity. And I think what I really hope is that we stick with going back to the moon, this time to stay, because that is actually the fastest way to get to Mars. It's the illusion that you can skip a step. Skipping steps slows you down. It's seductive but wrong, and the military that has a great saying: "Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast." And in this case, go to the moon. Get yourself set up there. Mine propellants there. Build a fuel depot there. It takes 24 times less energy to lift a pound off the moon than it does to lift a pound off the Earth. So if you're going to need a lot of supplies and fuel and bulk materials to go to Mars, you're much better lifting them off the moon than you are lifting them off the Earth. It's a gigantic lever. And so that's really, again, it's people, I have, there's like one internet meme that goes around is, why should we go to the moon? We've already done that. No, that's a bad, that's a, one thing I was talking to my 19-year-old son who's, he's a digital native and very brilliant, and I was talking to him about some topic, it doesn't matter what it was, and he said, oh no, Dad, you have to understand, the internet is a nuanced destruction machine. As a platform, and it's so fast, if you, Twitter cannot handle nuance, and so everything gets kind of de-nuanced on the internet. And everybody in this room, and if you're a leader of any kind, you need to fight that. You're not going to fight it on the internet. But I was talking to your daughter earlier, she's writing a book. That can have nuance. And we need to continue to have a civilization where we don't just fight on Twitter. My son said this other thing, too. He said, if you really want your meme on the internet to go far and travel fast, you have to eliminate all nuance in it and add conflict. And I was like, that's true and discouraging. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, we have not that much time left, but I would love to hear you. I think the audience would really love to hear you talk about, we've talked about the moon, we've talked about all the things we can do out there. But I think there's also, we're doing it, why did you choose the name Blue Origin?
Yeah.
And why are we doing this?
Yes, thank you for asking that. I think this is a really important question. It's called Blue Origin because this is the blue planet, and this is the planet that we have to save. This is the good planet in our solar system. We've sent robotic probes to all the planets now. This is the only good one. And we are now, for all of human history except very recently, we have been small. We humans, as a species, we have been small and the planet has been big. That's not true anymore. In the last 50 years, that has changed. And we all recognize that. And so we have to choose, we have this long line, my life is better than my grandparents' life was. Their life was better than their grandparents' life was. And we all want our grandkids' lives to be better than ours. And we want their grandkids' lives to be better than theirs. That's called progress. And we have been enjoying it for centuries. We want to keep enjoying it. And to do that, we're going to have to go out into the solar system where we have, for all practical purposes, unlimited resources, unlimited energy, unlimited material resources. And we can move, again, this isn't going to happen in our lifetimes, but we will move all heavy industry off Earth. All polluting industry will move off Earth, and Earth will end up zoned residential. And we will keep this planet as this remarkable oasis in this harsh solar system that it is. And by the way, we'll move all of this industry to space primarily because it'll be better. You have 24/7 solar power out there. You don't have nighttime to interfere with your solar arrays. You have, in the asteroids and on the moon and other near-Earth objects and so on, you have so many resources. And we will make, imagine why make the microprocessors here? Make the microprocessors in space and you can send them down, little finished components. So we really do have to protect this planet. It's the only good one in the solar system. And we can't, at our scale, if we're going to continue to make progress and make sure that our descendants have better lives than us, we need to go to space. It's not optional. There are people who haven't figured it out yet, but they're wrong, or they just haven't thought about it yet. We have to do this.
Well, I think talking about Earth is a great way to end. And we're here because we're so inspired by your vision of the future, and all that you've done. And so since the Kennedy Library is about connecting the past and the future, you're a perfect spokesperson. And I also have a present for you that is here. I think the fact that you've named your rockets New Glenn and New Shepard shows that you are, as you said, standing on the shoulders of giants. And I was lucky enough as a child to meet them. And my father, when we were all on the plane together, wrote this note that says, "For Caroline." And then it's signed by John Glenn, Alan Shepard, and Gus Grissom. And so it's something that I've treasured, and I have a copy here, facsimile, that I wanted to give to you because I think they're your heroes too, even though I know we're not allowed to use that word today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. That's incredible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
It says, John Glenn says here, "Best regards to Carolyn, and next time I'll try to bring the monkey."
I was actually really disappointed when I met them because I really wanted to see the monkey that had gone up in space. Which is what my mother had told me about. So
Oh my God.
why not New Ham?
I love that.
think that's-
Right, New Ham. That sounds
that's
great.
good.
Ham was the name of the monkey.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh my God. All
Okay.
right.
Well, thank you
It'll
all
be a
for
very
coming.
small vehicle for New Ham.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Carolyn.
Oh, is Michael going to come up? Michael's going to come up.
Could I ask all of you to take a seat while we ask Mike Collins and Jack and Tatiana Schlossberg to come up for a photo with Carolyn Kennedy and Jeff Bezos, and as they do, join me to thank them again for their inspiration and leadership. Thank you. Please be seated just while they exit, just for 1 minute. Join me again to congratulate and thank them while they exit. Thank you all for joining us today. This has been a real inspiration. Thank you very much.